The storm had rolled in fast that night, turning the narrow county road into a shimmering ribbon of danger. Most drivers sped past without noticing anything beyond the blur of rain, but she saw him, an elderly man alone on the roadside, drenched, limping, clutching a worn briefcase, as if it held the last pieces of his life. Something about him didn't fit the darkness. Something told her to stop, even though she had every reason not to. She was exhausted, underpaid, and fighting battles no one else could see. Yet that single moment, that impossible decision, would unravel a truth that would shake her entire world by morning. She had finished her shift long after the dinner crowd disappeared, long after the neon lights of the diner flickered into their tired overnight hum. The place was never kind to her, but it paid just enough to keep the lights on and help her mother with medication. Every night felt the same. Long hours, strained smiles, managers who seemed to watch her more closely than anyone else, as if waiting for her to slip. Being one of the only black employees meant she was always aware of how carefully she had to move, how flawless she had to be, because mistakes didn't land the same for her as they did for the others. As she drove home through the storm, her mind drifted to the stack of bills on her kitchen table and the warning her supervisor had given earlier that day. He didn't have to say much. The tone in his voice carried the threat clearly. She knew she was one complaint away from losing the job she relied on. The weight of it lingered in her chest like humidity before a storm, tightening with every passing mile. The road had emptied, the last of the traffic fading into the hiss of rain. That was when she spotted the man. A solitary figure hunched against the punishing downpour, his suit clinging to him like a shadow. Something about his presence didn't belong on that forgotten stretch of asphalt at that hour. Cars surged by without slowing, as if he were invisible. She recognized that invisibility. She had felt it her entire life, walking through rooms where her existence barely registered, unless she made a mistake. A knot of empathy twisted inside her. She knew the dangers of stopping for a stranger. She knew the risks a woman alone shouldn't take. But she also knew what it was like to be left standing in the rain, unseen by the world. And in that moment, that was enough to make her slow down. The rain hammered harder as she eased her truck toward the shoulder, the wipers struggling to keep up. The old man seemed startled when he realized a vehicle had actually stopped for him. He hesitated before approaching, wary yet desperate, as though he had been stranded long enough to lose hope that anyone might care. She unlocked the door and waited, her heart throbbing with a blend of caution and compassion. The storm muffled every sound, except the relentless drumming on the roof. When he finally settled into the seat beside her, he carried with him the cold weight of the night, a chill that seeped into the cab like a silent plea. His clothes were soaked, his briefcase dripping at his feet. He looked like someone who had once lived inside a world of polished floors and warm offices, now reduced to a figure struggling against the elements. She pulled back onto the road, resisting the urge to glance at him too often. She didn't need details to understand that he had been abandoned in the storm, overlooked by the drivers choosing speed over compassion. She had seen that pattern all her life: who was acknowledged, who was ignored, who was quietly deemed unworthy of help. Her thoughts drifted back to the diner, to the tension that always hovered in the air. She remembered the way customers' eyes sometimes skimmed over her, as though she wasn't the one serving them, as though her presence required justification. She remembered the clipped instructions, the subtle but unmistakable scrutiny, and the way even her smallest mistakes turned into whispered discussions among supervisors. Every shift demanded a level of perfection nobody else was expected to match. And even perfection didn't guarantee security. Driving through the flooded streets, she felt the familiar weight of uncertainty press against her. She didn't know if the man beside her was safe, or whether helping would invite trouble. she couldn't afford. But she also knew the difference between caution and the instinct to dehumanize, a line many people crossed without thinking. She refused to be one of them. The old man's breathing steadied as the truck's heater thawed the cold from his bones. He looked fragile, as if life had pressed down on him too heavily. She sensed that something important clung to him, something beyond the soaked suit or battered briefcase. She couldn't articulate it, but she felt it. The storm had transformed the town into a maze of blurred lights and flooded gutters. Most places were closed, leaving only scattered street lamps glowing like faint beacons. She drove in silence, guided by intuition and a quiet determination to get him somewhere safe. As they reached the edge of town, she found a spot where he could wait for the rain to ease, sheltered and near passing traffic. Before he stepped out, he paused long enough to look at her, really look at her, with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It was as though he struggled to understand why she had stopped when so many others hadn't. She didn't expect anything in return. She only hoped she had done enough. What she didn't know was that the soaked, wary man she quietly rescued was someone whose influence stretched far beyond the storm. Someone whose world, though cracked by circumstance, still held the power to shift hers in ways she never imagined. By morning, that truth would come crashing into her life with the force of another storm, one she never saw coming. The next morning unfolded with the kind of heaviness that seemed to predict bad news. She arrived at the diner early, hoping the quiet hours before opening would give her space to breathe. But the moment she stepped through the door, she felt something was wrong. The manager stood near the counter with a clipboard pressed to his chest, watching her with that familiar expression. The one that always signaled trouble was about to roll downhill onto her. She already knew what was coming. A complaint had been filed, he said. A customer claimed she had been inattentive, slow, unprofessional. She didn't need to hear the rest. She recognized the pattern. It wasn't the first time a baseless accusation had been used to justify a threat against her job. She had seen others get gentle warnings, quiet corrections, easy forgiveness. But for her, each complaint felt like a loaded trap, swift, severe, and final. It was exhausting to carry the unspoken weight that her mistakes, real or invented, were treated as proof of something deeper, something unfairly assumed about her. The manager made it clear that her job was hanging by a thread. He didn't need to say the final words. His eyes delivered them with cold certainty. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, that sinking realization that she was one decision away from losing everything she worked so hard to hold together. The fear settled in her stomach like a stone. As the morning rush trickled in, she forced herself to move with practiced calm, even as anxiety gnawed at the edges of her focus. The injustice felt suffocating. The idea that she could do everything right yet still be pushed out simply because she was an easy target made her hands tremble with quiet frustration. She thought of her mother, of the bills, of the long nights spent convincing herself she could endure just a little longer. Then, unexpectedly, the diner door swung open. A presence entered, not loud, not dramatic, but carrying a gravity that shifted the room. Customers turned. Employees straightened. Even the manager stiffened. She looked up, not yet understanding what was happening. But the man who stepped forward, the same man she helped in the storm, was about to alter the course of her day, her job, and her life with a force far greater than the rain she had rescued him from. He stood inside the diner with an unmistakable sense of purpose, no longer the fragile figure shivering in the rain. In the clarity of daylight, he appeared composed, steady, and unmistakably influential. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The room quieted, as though everyone sensed something significant unfolding. She watched him with a mixture of confusion and recognition. Her thoughts still tangled in the morning's threats and the weight of everything she feared losing. The manager straightened, attempting to mask the sudden nervousness tightening his stance. Something unspoken passed between him and the man, an imbalance of power that became immediately visible. Without raising his voice or making a scene, the visitor's calm demeanor carried more authority than any confrontation ever could. The manager's posture softened, his certainty cracked, and the rigid confidence he'd held moments earlier dissolved into something closer to regret or fear of consequence. She didn't know what the man said or implied. She only knew that after a brief exchange, the tension in the room shifted. The manager retreated, returning minutes later with a forced politeness she had never seen directed her way. The threat hanging over all morning evaporated, as quietly as mist lifting from pavement. She had been spared, not through pleading or desperation, but because someone had seen her humanity when others chose not to. As the man prepared to leave, he offered her a steady, reassuring nod, one that carried gratitude far deeper than words could express. She realized then that helping a stranger in the rain had created a ripple far larger than she imagined. Not because she expected anything in return, but because compassion, offered freely, sometimes found its way back in unexpected forms. When the door closed behind him, she felt the weight in her chest ease for the first time in months. The injustice she faced had not disappeared, but it had been challenged by someone who used his influence not to overshadow her, but to protect the dignity she fought so hard to hold. Walking back to her station, she wondered how many lives might change if more people chose to see one another the way she had seen him on that stormy road. How different would the world look if compassion, not judgment, decided who was worthy of help? And as the diner returned to its usual rhythm, one quiet question lingered in her mind. If a single act of kindness could alter her fate so profoundly, what might happen if everyone dared to offer one?